Thank you all very much. It is gone 2 o'clock now. Welcome to everybody. But I still would hope if you could possibly be a little more patient. We've just received quite a bit of late correspondence. So if members are feeling that they need 5 minutes to read it, would you like me to suspend it now for 5 minutes for you to do that, or are you happy to go ahead? You've read it, most of you read it, some of you have had emails, some of you have had hard copies. So, right, we'll continue with the meeting. Right, welcome everybody and thank you again. Welcome to the Planning Committee. This is now on the 6th of February, quite notorious. It is a lady standing as I am as chair. It's for the 100 years since we all got the vote, and we've got a lady chair of the council as well. So we do make progress. Please make sure that everybody's got their mobile phone switched off, as it does interrupt with things in here. And we are live streaming, so please be aware of that also. Apologies for absence first, please.
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Feakins and Evans.
Right, thank you, Richard. I'll introduce myself as County Councillor Ruth Edwards, and to my right,
County Councillor Peter Clark, and only ladies over 30 who could vote 100 years ago.
He can remember it well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Robert Tranter. I'm a solicitor and the legal advisor to this committee.
Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager with the Council.
Mark Hand, Head of Planning, Housing and Place Shaping.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
And Amy Longford, Heritage Manager.
Thank you all very much indeed for your declaring who you are. Declarations of interest, please. No members have got any at the start? Right, thank you very much. We'll go now on to confirm the minutes of the last meeting. This was on the 9th of January, from pages 1 to 6. This is for accuracy only. Has anybody got anything to arise? If we haven't,
no,
we'll...
prepared to move them, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do you have a second, Jim Higginson? Thank you. All approval for this minutes? Right, thank you. We'll now go on to the first consideration of applications today. I believe, is that you, Craig? Yes. Right, and this is now at Troy House in Monmouth. This is application 00723. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This application is at Troy House, Mitchell Troy in Monmouth. The application was previously presented to the Planning Committee on June 6th last year. It was recommended for refusal at that stage because we were awaiting some key information, some key documentation to support the application. This is now being submitted and a full consultation process has been done on that details of those reports. Officers are now representing the application with a recommendation to approve the proposed development. The application has been considered as a departure and advertised as a departure from the adopted local development plan because some conflict in relation to the conflict with flooding and also with new build development in the open countryside. So Troy House is a large, as you can see from this picture, a large 17th century Grade 2 stylistic building. It's located in the southeast of Monmouth in the open countryside. The building is now in a state of disrepair and the heritage asset is deteriorating. If you go on to the pictures, this is to the west of the site. This is the existing science block, which is a modern building which was built when the previous use as a school was established. That's a picture from the gates. As you can see, it's a large, very historic building of national importance. Again, it's a picture of the modern elements of the site. And this is the internal pictures of the site, where you can see some of the ceilings, which have now deteriorated significantly. I think these pictures just show how the state of the building as it is in the moment. I know members were not allowed to access it in terms of health and safety, so this just shows you a bit of the detail of internal. So this is the proposed development. You can see there centrally is Troy House. That's the historic asset in the middle. The proposal is to convert that building into 19 apartments, luxury apartments, and then In terms of enabling development, there's 2 wings proposed. So this is on the east and the west, which will wrap around the building, and also a small gatehouse at the entrance to the site as well, which would be used for the private management companies. So that's the proposed development. All the parking as well would be located at the front of the building. And obviously the application proposes additional landscaping sensitive to the area, and a dark corridor at the bottom for ecology in this direction, yeah. Let's go through to the next plan, Phil. This is a plan of the access road up onto the main road from Monmouth to Mitchell Troy. This is a farm track at the moment in the ownership of the neighbouring property Troy Farm, and this plan shows where there's potential to be passing bays on this within the site. Let's go to the next slide. I think that doesn't show any additional proposal. These are the detailed floor plans of the application. So as I said, there's 19 apartments in the main house, and then there's 31 in the new build element. That's the attic, yeah, which has been left over for bat mitigation. So we go to the next plan should be on. So this is a good detailed plan in terms of showing you how the new build relates to the existing historic building of Troy House. So it would be wrapping around 2 wings on each side, which should be subordinate and symmetrical to the main building. So you can see there how this can look visually. The new wings would be approximately 12.6 metres high, and they would be constructed with all high palliative materials to include a natural slate for the roof, render for the external walls, and timber for the openings. And as I say, from the plans you can see there the proposals for landscaping, detailed landscaping of the site as well. As I said, a full consultation process has been done on this site. I'll just summarise some of the correspondence that's been received. Both Mitchell Troy Community Council and Monmouth Town Council have recommended refusal of the application based on highway safety grounds, with the information outlined in your report. Natural Resources Wales have also formally objected to the application. As you might be aware from, you are aware from the previous meeting, the site is in a very sensitive location. It's in an undefended floodplain, C2. So they have objected on the principle of the development. They also raised concerns with regards to the landscape impact of the new development. Cadw have generally shown support for the application. However, they do feel that some of the new build element might harm some of the heritage values of the place and adversely affect the building setting. Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust have recommended that a full evaluation is conducted prior to determination of the application. MCC Highways officers have outlined they haven't got any adverse comments to the application. Given the previous use of the site as a school, they are happy with the amount of traffic generated from this development would be similar, if not less than what was previously used for. So they're happy and have no adverse comments to make to the application. In terms of ecology, this is a significant habitat for bats at this particular site, and our council's biodiversity officer and also Natural Resources Wales reviewed the application and are satisfied the bat mitigation proposals are acceptable and a licence could be granted for this site. Monmouthshire Council's emergency planning managers also reviewed the flood consequence assessment which has been submitted with the application, and has outlined that they don't have any adverse comments to make on the proposals. He thinks it's encouraging that the site would become developed, and he feels that a flood evacuation plan could be developed for the site via the condition, so he was satisfied with the site. In terms of neighbour notifications and third-party representations, there have been a few objections made to the application as outlined in your report in terms of the impact of the development on the heritage asset, concerns over the capabilities of the access and highway safety, concerns over the harm to wildlife, and also concerns over the development as a whole in terms of the way the new development has an impact on the registered park and garden. In terms of the evaluation of the developments, I'm going to pass you on to my colleague Amy, who is the Heritage Manager, who will talk you through the proposed developments in terms of the enabling developments and also the way in which the new development has an impact on the heritage asset, and then I'll come back and speak to you about flooding, highways, and wrap up some of the other issues.
Thank you, Craig. As Craig's been through, the principle of the development is contrary to the LDP policy, as it does propose new build in the open countryside. However, the justification for this is purely for the enabling development to restore the heritage asset. As Craig says, it's a very important historic building. It's a grade 2 star listed building, and the viability of the overall scheme has been carefully considered. And the enabling development is fundamental to restoring Troy House. Given that the viability of the scheme is particularly constrained, the Council will not be seeking any Section 106 agreements or provisions. The main objective is simply to restore Troy House and maintain the heritage asset. In terms of the listed building, I've been working closely with the agent, and I have sought modifications and negotiated on the listed building consent application for the internal arrangement of the apartments in Troy House. These have been amended, and I am happy with the proposals. I've sent them off to CADU and they have been returned. CADU are happy for us to now issue listed building consent for the house. So, the house is also within a registered park and garden, as Craig has said. This is also registered 2-star. The historic park and garden entry identifies the walled garden and the surviving walls and doorways as an important feature of that garden and a justification for its higher grading. There is an impact on the garden, and that is something that I'll just come to in a minute, but we need to think about the condition of Troy House as well. It has been vacant for some considerable time. There is a caretaker living in the property and maintaining it safety. But there is an elevated chance of decline for the building, and it is on our buildings at risk register. And as a local authority, we have a duty to be responsible and make sure that we do our best to preserve the heritage asset. The proposals form part of the application for the conversion of the house into 19 apartments will have an impact on the internal arrangements and the significance, but this has been balanced against the need to protect and restore the house. And as I say, CADU are happy with these proposals. Similarly, the proposed new build has been designed and carefully considered in its architectural style following the main house, and it is subservient and appropriate for the house. So in terms of the garden, as Craig said, the Grogan Gwent Archaeological Trust have requested an evaluation prior to determination. However, whilst it's agreed by officers that the proposed development has potential harm on the archaeological features and in the site, we have conditioned that a programme of archaeological implementation in accordance with a written scheme of investigation, and an archaeologist will be on site present during any ground disturbing works. Should anything be found, these will be recorded. In terms of the heritage setting, CADU, as Craig said, have raised concerns over the impact on the place and special setting of the listed building. However, they have also commented that the wings will be entirely reversible. These comments or these concerns over the impact on the setting of the registered garden and the house are reiterated by NRW and Dr. Anne Benson. And there's concerns over the impact on the garden and the wider landscape, respectively. Both these elements of the overall development are required to ensure that Troy House is restored, and therefore, on balance, it's considered that the harm can be justified and is acceptable. The proposed east wing is required to ensure that development is viable in the proposition in terms of the design. It balances the appearance of the wings, and it means that it is designed in a way that the building may well have been extended in the past. The impact of the development on the historic assets does need to be balanced, but it is, in our opinion, an overriding need to restore Troy House. There are concerns over the wider landscape and the impact of quite a substantial building in the landscape setting. However, it is considered that these buildings are quite close to the existing house, and therefore they will be viewed as a group. They are not spread out, and they will be assimilated into the form and pattern of these existing buildings, and therefore the impact is not considered to be detrimental or sufficiently detrimental to warrant refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that detailed report. Back to Craig again now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so I just wanted to cover with members a few of the other points which are of interest with this particular application. Particularly flooding. It's a very sensitive site. This site is undefended floodplain, so it is highly vulnerable in terms of Technical Advice Note 15 from the Welsh Government. We shouldn't be allowing any forms of highly vulnerable forms of development within this floodplain. So this residential development is usually considered to be contrary to national policy and also Monmouthshire's local development plans as well. This application has been advertised as a departure because we feel that as outlined in your report, there is a strong case and justification for allowing this type of development in this location, given the fact that we need to preserve and restore Troy House. Also, the site has historically been used as a form of highly vulnerable form of development. So it was previously a school. So it's in the same classification in TAN 15 as residential development. So historically it has had a highly vulnerable use. So they're the two main factors in which we've looked at when assessing this and giving the recommendation to you today. TAN 15 does also outline justification tests in where residential development, usually in C1, would be allowed, but we thought it would be prudent to actually address these to you as well. So it is obviously part of a key regeneration scheme to develop Troy House. That's one of the justifications for this development, for this residential development in the floodplain. It also, this historical use, and it is developed land previously, so the previous use is well established and it was previously used as a school. We also feel the proposed development is reasonably required to ensure the renovation of the building and ensure this social and heritage benefits of keeping this building is maintained. In terms of Natural Resources Wales, they've actually reviewed the flood consequence assessment which is submitted with the application, and broadly speaking, most of the buildings in site would meet the tolerance levels for the 1 in 100 plus climate change. It doesn't meet specifically because of the finished floor levels of Troy House. So Troy House would actually flood in the 1 to 100 plus climate change. But given the fact that it's an existing building, and if we change the levels there at the site, it would have an impact on the heritage asset and its inherent character, we consider that to be acceptable. The new build elements would actually be flood-free in the 1 in 100 plus climate change event, so the new build would be flood-free, and the gatehouse would flood by 20 millimetres, which we consider to be acceptable. Unfortunately, the car park would flood in that 1 in 100 event plus climate change. And again, if we did we've had to look at different options of where we can put the car park in, but unfortunately, given the impact that it would have on the listed building setting, we think that the proposed car parking is the best solution for the site. In the 1 in 1,000 year event for flooding, the whole site would flood. I think members need to be aware of that. It is an extreme weather event, and there is the Natural Resources Wales have recognised that. It's been considered by the Council's emergency planning manager, and there is an evacuation route available to the south of the site. So, subject to a condition, we feel that we'd be able to support that. We'd also feel there'd be safe refuge in the building as well, so people would be able to go up to higher levels in the building for safe refuge, and subject to a condition and occupiers being aware of the flooding risks and signing up to the Natural Resources Wales warning system, that there's enough safeguard in there so that the risk to life is minimised. So, in terms of reviewing the development and this sensitive site, on balance, as officers, we are recommending this application is approved, contrary to the conflict with TAN 15 and our local development plan, because there is significant weight and evidence to suggest that the site has been historically used for a highly vulnerable form of development. There is a significant need to renovate the building and restore this heritage asset. And also, the consequences of flooding can be managed reasonably to our effect. If you are minded to support our recommendation today, it's worth noting that this will have to be, we'd have to notify the Welsh Government whether they want to call this application in. Similarly, what happened with Hadnock, the hotel at Hadnock Road. So they'd have the option to call the application in, and then they would obviously determine the application then if they felt that was the right thing to do. In relation to highway safety, obviously there's been a number of concerns raised in the report from the Community Council, Mitchell Troy Community Council, Monmouth Town Council and some of the neighbouring parties. The application has been reviewed significantly by our highways officers, and they have reviewed the data. And they did have some concerns over the validity of the data. However, the previous use as a school is a material consideration when considering this application. And if that was in operation, there would be a lot of traffic movements from the site. The access onto the main road at the top doesn't meet fully the requirements of TAN 18. However, on balance, given it is an existing access, existing farm track, and there is the potential for it to be open as a similar use as the previous, it is considered to be acceptable. So highway officers are supportive, well, they have no adverse comments of the application. So as officers, we are minded to support the proposal and feel that it is in accordance with policy MV1 of the local development plan. As Amy said, we've been working on this application for many years now. It was submitted 10 years ago, and one of the reasons why it's taken so long is in relation to ecology at the site. It is a huge bat habitat, this building, so it has been rigorously reviewed by ecologists and Natural Resources Wales, and they are now satisfied that all the mitigation that is proposed is satisfactory, and again, in terms of ecology, we would now support the proposals. The proposed layout as well also outlines a lot of green infrastructure and landscape features, so that would also help with what Amy was discussing about the wider landscape impact of the development. So it would be well screened, it would be contained within that group of buildings, and we think on balance that that is acceptable and wouldn't have a harmful impact on the wider area. So for the reasons outlined within the report and for the significant justification I've outlined, we do think that the underarching foundation of this application and of our recommendation is to preserve this significant heritage asset. We acknowledge that there is going to be new build developments in the open countryside, but it is enabling development. Therefore, we think it is warranted in this case. We also feel that the flooding conflict with flooding is deemed to be acceptable. And we think that the most important thing is to preserve this building and restore it for future generations, and ensure that it can be maintained. We could look at potential other uses, which is mentioned in the report. However, this is the application which is in front of us, and this is the application which we feel would give the best opportunity to restore that building. So we are recommending the application is approved, subject to conditions outlined in your report.
Thank you very much indeed, Craig. I believe the local member wishes to speak. If you'd like to take the stand, please. Please state your name also, councillor, just in case some don't recognise you.
No, that's fair enough. Thank you very much. I'm Richard John, and I'm the county councillor for the Mitchell Troy ward. And thank you for giving me the chance to say a few words about this. Clearly, I, like many people, have a great deal of sympathy with the desire to save a 17th century Grade 2 listed building. It's got great, it's of great historical importance in the Monmouth and surrounding area, and I have great sympathy with the desire to save it. But I've had a number of concerns that have been raised with me by local residents, by town councillors, by community councillors, really concerned about a range of things, but I'm going to focus my remarks on one aspect. But I've had concerns about the impact this is going to have on an organic dairy farm. It's been well reported about the challenges facing the agricultural industry, and I think that's a very real concern that the agricultural industry in Monmouthshire could suffer as a result of this. We've heard about, and I appreciate you've had many submissions to this effect, but about environmental concerns, about flood risk, and also about the integrity and heritage of the building. But I want to focus my remarks, if that's okay, on access to the property. While I recognise the comments made earlier about how the property was a school, including in the 1990s, and there is a history of traffic using that junction, I'm very concerned that 25 years, 30 years has passed and traffic volumes have changed significantly in the Monmouth area. We know that the volume of traffic using the Monmouth to Mitchell-Troy route has increased significantly over the years. So I would have concerns about the volume of traffic using that road and traffic coming out of the Troy Farm junction, because it's on a blind bend, as members will have seen. And while there may not be many reported accidents, you can see from the chevron signs that there have been accidents. Those signs have been battered. I've heard many anecdotes about near misses on the junction, incidents that would not be reported. And of course, that junction is not being heavily used as much as it would be if you were to turn the property into over 50 flats, and presumably close to 100 vehicles, plus the deliveries, shopping deliveries, and so on, that you would also get. The increase in traffic, not only using that lane down to Troy Farm and mixing with cattle movements, as I understand, there are cattle which use that lane twice a day to travel 3/4 of the length of that lane to be milked, and we're talking about cows of about 3/4 of a ton, bulls of about 1 ton. Just the thought of some sort of incidents between cattle travelling on that road and a significant increase in volume of traffic, I think, is really concerning. I think there's a concern about risk of damage to vehicles. It's also, if you're creating luxury apartments, is the ideal access route for those residents to travel through excrement and all sorts to get to their residence? I think there is a real concern about access to Troy House, and I really think that more thought should have been given as to how the residents can be properly accessed. So I propose that I would like to see the proposal rejected, so that there's time to put forward a fresh proposal with a new access route that is safe, not just for the residents of Troy House, but also for the residents who use that main road between Monmouth and Mitchell-Troy, because it's a blind bend, traffic goes at quite some speed, and given the amount of farm machinery that will also be using that lane, I think that's a really toxic mix. So I don't feel that that's been given sufficient consideration. I'm disappointed that there isn't a Section 106 agreement with this, because I feel there is a need to invest in infrastructure if this development is to go ahead, because you need a proper access road for the volume of traffic that over 50 flats would produce. I note the opposition that's been voiced and that's been presented from local residents in the immediate vicinity, from Monmouth Town Council, from Mitchell-Troy Community Council. There's a real strength of feeling that while there's sympathy that we want to see some way whereby Troy House can be saved and its character protected, that there are considerable objections to this proposal, and that local knowledge, I think, is really important. So I would say to members, I hope you can recognise the opposition of local members, of local residents, and the two town and community councils, and I hope you'll give this your full consideration. So I hope that a revised plan can be put forward at a later date, including a new access road from Troy House to join the B4293 at a later date. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor. I believe we have another speaker. Mr. Bryn Thomas, is it? You have 4 minutes. Thank you. If you please state your main name.
My name is Bryn Thomas of Agri Advisor Solicitors. We're formally instructed on behalf of Irving Long of Troy Farm and as spokesperson essentially for a number of the other members of the public in close proximity to the House, in particular David and Sally Evans of Troy Lodge. The application, has been alluded to, was made in December 2008 and has thus suffered from significant delay already. The application, we say, is akin to a millie village in the open countryside within an area of outstanding natural beauty. The development cannot be considered in keeping with that setting. The application, as has been alluded to, is a departure from the local development plan as it proposes a new build development in the open countryside and is contrary to local and national planning policies. The overriding concern that has dominated all considerations is that of the preservation of the historic asset, basically the building itself. This is clearly accepted in the case officer's report, where it states that the main objective of the development is to ensure the long-term preservation of Troy House. We say that that preservation at all cost and contrary to many other material considerations, transport, ecological, landscape impacts and planning policy, we say that's not a fundamental of heritage preservation. The detailed discussions have failed to acknowledge, we will say, nor remedy the fundamental flaws in the application in relation to highways. The highways audit continues to mistakenly compare the likely traffic of the development to a school, whereas the reality is the school run from these premises was an approved boarding school, which by its nature produced less traffic than a day school. Further, as to the reference to existing school use or extant use, we question whether existing is in fact correct, given that nearly 30 years have passed since last functional use of the building. We have raised in our previous written submissions the issue of abandonment, and this is supported by the fact that the property is in a poor state of repair, and there was a recent notice issued for urgent works, and it's been supported again today by the photographs that we've seen of the internal sections of the building. This will demonstrate it no longer has that use, and where there is an abandoned use, there is nothing in law and or policy which determines an abandoned use must or should be revived. Your attention is also drawn to the viability study. This was presented in December 2008. It sets out a number of the number of units required to make the conversion and the development a viable project. The study itself is now 10 years out of date, as I've said, and accordingly we say reliance on the same to argue that the proposal is viable is just simply irrational. Costs have moved on, and placing significant weight on that report is just improper. Many of the elements of concern couched as proposed conditions should be resolved prior to determination and not after. Referred to paragraph 610(1) of the case officer's report, and that describes concerns in relation to passing bays and the legal rights of the applicants to have use of the lane for the purpose, as civil matters for the applicant and the relevant parties to resolve. These are fundamental elements and should be resolved before any decision. A key concern of my client is that little consideration seems to have been given to the clear issues of traffic safety linked to Troy Farm being a commercial dairy unit of some 200 to 300 cows. Twice daily milking is carried out when the cows will use the lane to access and leave the milking parlour, and that covers a period of about 8 months a year. 8 months in the year. The cows walk to and from the parlour and field at their own pace, and that is to keep stress levels down within the cows, and therefore use the lane for some 4 to 6 hours per day. HGV milk tankers also visit the farm on a daily basis to take the milk. The area is within flood zone C. It's an
Could you
undefended.
please wind up? You've had your 4 minutes.
I won't
Thank
be too
you.
much longer. It's within an undefended flood plain. It's regarded as a highly vulnerable development within TAN 15, and the note states that such residential development should not be permitted. So therefore, just in conclusion, in a summary, it's submitted that the process of the application and the length of time it's taken to get to this point has precluded public transparency and certainty, and this taken with all the past written objections and the oral objections today strongly dictates, we say, to the fact that the application should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We now have the applicant's agent who wishes to speak. Could you please state your name, and you also have 4 minutes.
Thank you. My name's Graham Frecknell. I'm the agent and architect responsible for producing the scheme that's the subject of these applications. I think I just wanted to refer to a number of salient points. The first is that the applications have been scrutinised for just over 10 years, and they've been subject to requests for further and information, supporting statements and reports from specialist consultants throughout that period. All of the information requested has been provided, and these additional amounts of information were provided by dates that were agreed with the local authority, and consequently all submitted information was subject to consultation and reconsultation process as required. A couple of small points that I've picked up from previous speakers. I think it's probably worth noting that in January 2009, I presented the same scheme to Mitchell Troy Community Council. It was reported that at that time there were about 20 people present. I would have said there were nearer 100. And at that meeting, the council supported the application as presented. As far as the access is concerned, the highway standards were subject to 2 independent reports by highway engineers. The first part was included with the justification statement that went with the original application. The second was a supplementary statement that was produced by Clark Bond prior to the information being put forward for scrutiny by the local authority, highway authority, and they concluded that there is no planning reason or highway grounds that the application should be refused. We had the opportunity and benefit of working with each member of the planning authority in a productive way to produce this scheme, and I would suggest that the report that has been presented to this committee at the beginning of this session is a very fair and independent statement of fact, and that the conclusions drawn and the recommendations for conditions attached should the committee decide that they would support this application seem to be reasonable and appropriate, and that is particularly, in my view, the case for conditions 3 and 4, which relate to the highway question that was the subject of the previous speaker's presentation. The question of viability was raised, and I think that is also a point that should be mentioned as well. A revised viability study was produced as part of the requirement of the 4 major outstanding sets of supplementary information that was requested in August of last year. But there are 2 points on that. First of all, I think the viability is...
Could you please wind up? You've had 4 minutes.
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
To produce a viability study on the basis of the information that's available at the moment is very speculative because it means that assumptions have to be made about things such as construction costs and indeed the perceived value of the land, which will influence the viability. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, now for the members to raise any issues or comment. I think most members of the committee have visited there more than once, actually. So I welcome any comments now from Councillor Phil Murphy first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think all of us would agree that there's an awful lot of problems associated with this site. And before I comment any further, I'd like to pick up on the roadway issue first. It's been suggested that an alternative roadway should be put in. From my viewing of the area, I don't see where that could actually go. Is there, officers will know the area better than me, is there an alternative route? And the thing that would worry me about an alternative route is that the new wings are there to pay for the restoration of the building. If a revised planning application required the building of a new road, I would suggest that would make the whole scheme totally unviable.
And I do believe it's under the land around it is under different ownership as well, which would be a different thing.
Would cause even more problems. But I think I would like to know if there's an alternative route. But my argument would be that if there was, I don't see how the whole scheme stacks up if that road has to be built. So that would be one question that perhaps officers can consider while I'm going into the rest of it. I think it was mentioned by Amy that these buildings over the years tended to get extended, and you look at Badminton, which was built by the same people. From what I remember, there's great wings on that. You know, it's quite normal. Every now and again, a new owner adds a new wing. So further development of this particular property would be in keeping with what tends to happen over the years. So that doesn't particularly bother me. I am concerned about the dual use of the track. It's not very wide. I know there's passing places going to go in, and it is a concern that there's going to be livestock going up and down. But it removes the eyesore. It provides a solution to the restoration of the building. I'm quite certain that the identified problems can be overcome. If there's a will, there's usually a way. But that question about the alternative access is one that I would like some sort of response on.
And also, Councillor, I do believe that they have got a lawful right of access, irrespective of the ownership of that lane. So they have got a right of access no matter how many times or whatever time of day that they wish to access the actual Troy House.
Yeah, in response to your comments, Councillor Murphy, there was a suggestion from Mitchell Troy Common from an access route. Look at the south-west there. There's a old farm track there. Sorry, Councillor Edwards, that location there over the field, which would connect up behind the toll house up on the other side over the whole field. But there were concerns there in terms of land ownership, in terms of the cost of putting that track in to facilitate it. So that application, that option was explored. However, the applicants, in conclusion, decided to go for the proposal, and obviously in communication with our council's highways officers as well, and they're satisfied with the proposed access arrangements. So it has been explored and has been looked at, but obviously what we need to determine is what's in front of us today.
Thank you, Craig. I'd say we're dealing with what's in front of us today. Councillor Powell, now to comment, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I know this is the main problem, I think, is this driveway and all that, but it was used, obviously not, as you say, not as much because it was a boarding school, but it would have been used quite frequently when it was a school. And with the cows, they're going to be milked twice a day, and cows usually are milked at the same time twice a day. Having worked at a dairy farm, I know it is the same time usually, so that the residents would be aware and would be told that at those couple of hours then that they should refrain from using the drive for their own safety and for convenience of the cattle. I would hope that that could be arranged. I would think that if, at the moment, we went down there yesterday and it was very muddy and very mucky, but I mean, that could be altered if that driveway was resurfaced. And I should think perhaps the developer could look into possibly resurfacing that, which would help both the farmer and anybody who is living at the Troy House. It does seem a shame that a building of this sort should be left to deteriorate completely when it could be restored. And somebody mentioned something about the cows being a bit big and bulls. You don't usually have many bulls with a lot of cows. I mean, one bull will service an awful lot of cows, and I mean, I don't know whether he uses a bull. He may use AI, so I don't think he's going to worry about bull rampaging down through the roads. Usually, if they're with cattle, they're very placid. As I said, there should be arrangement that within certain hours, the drive is for the cattle, and ask people to refrain from using it if at all possible. But it, as I said, I feel a bit like Councillor Murphy. It seems a shame that this should be left to deteriorate to nothing. And let's hope that the problems could be overcome in some way or other.
Thank you very much, Councillor Powell. Councillor Anne Webb, then Councillor Giles Howard, and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. One of the speakers mentioned the strength of feeling by the Community Council of Mitchell Troy and the Town Council of Monmouth. They're not here to speak, and I really regret that today. And also, can I ask you, have the AONB been contacted? You've done a comprehensive report regarding the significant impact on the AONB, Craig, but I just wondered if they'd actually been courteous enough to respond. That's one thing. And just refer members to 6.11.1, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I see that you've thoroughly looked at this and the ways of working by restoring a significant heritage asset. And I think that's really important for the wellbeing of future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor Giles Howard.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a selection of rather random points, so they're in no logical order. Firstly, I wonder if the officers could provide us with a brief outline of any enforcement action that's taken to previously try and protect the integrity of the asset. Second question, and it relates to highways and parking. 50 apartments, I could count roughly 63 spaces. Is that adequate to service a development? Because there's no detail in the report of the number of bedrooms created by those apartments. The access point, yeah, that's the weak issue for me. I'd like a bit more understanding about the ownership of the lane. I assume it's shared with the farm, in which case any work to it, or I'm guessing any intensification of its use would require the agreement of the farm in order for the development to be enabled. Could you also enlarge on the concerns that are hinted at in the report? I think paraphrasing a little bit, the highway officers have received additional information and haven't any objection, but concerns remain. I'd just like to know what those concerns are. And the last one then is about the scheme as a whole and the effect on the setting. To me, that's less of a concern. The wings are subordinate. They're of a similar style, and I think they're vastly preferable to the later 20th century additions to either side of the building, and indeed the farm unit itself, which is quite large and evidently from the aerial photography contains a large number of units which dwarf the proposal in front of us. I'm still unsure about whether to support it or not at this stage. I'd like to hear the other views of members. I understand the need to protect Troy House, and that enabling developments like this are quite common, but I do have concerns mainly about access more than anything else.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Louise Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My concerns really focus on, there was a discussion from the different speakers about the viability, and obviously one of the issues is about having the new build because of the viability, but also there's going to be 31 new build properties, and then there's 19 in the original house. One of my concerns is about this being in flood zone C2, because obviously highly vulnerable development isn't supposed to be in that. Now, I think with the new build, this has been tackled by the levels of the land and so forth, so that's less of a concern. But what I'm concerned about is basically the luxury flats at the bottom, which are liable to flooding. And in terms of viability, if they are luxury flats, I would like to have seen that the bottom level of that particular development could have had things in there like a gym, a lounge, a laundrette, or various other things that would service and provide a social and area for the residents, and you'd still end up with probably about 44 flats as opposed to 44 units as opposed to the 50 we're talking about, and that will give me less concern in relation to the flood zone C2. So I'm just wondering whether this application could be deferred to look at viability and how tackling that. It's those bottom flats that are the ones that are most vulnerable. Now, if you have lounges and gyms and various other things that maintenance charges can be charged for in relation to the flats, make it a much nicer sociable development for people, is an alternative to deal with that particular issue. And we're probably talking about, if there's 19 flats, I would think about possibly about 5 or 6 of them. And I just think that would be a better way of tackling this flood thing rather than a flood evacuation plan. And I just think that sort of thing should have been given more consideration, because it would have got over this issue about people being on the ground level liable to be flooding. The other issue, of course, is the highways and the access issue. The other issue I think that Councillor Howard raised was about parking. About 63 parking spaces for 50 units. I think also the consideration is where the parking actually is, because it's going to be in a separate location from where the units are based. Now, what's going to be done to actually prevent people parking very close to where they're actually living? And I don't know whether any consideration, not only in terms of the volume of parking spaces, but also in terms of how you're going to stop people actually parking right next to their residence, because obviously that would spoil the look of the place. And I understand it's designed in a sort of a wing-like basis, and I can see the point of that to enhance the current listed building. And I can also see the point about the wanting to restore this building. And but I think we do need to look at viability issues a bit more, because I'm not convinced. The first speaker said to us that a viability report was done about 10 years ago, and then the next speaker said, there's been an up-to-date assessment, but he was a little bit sort of not quite clear about what the viability issue was. But I mean, I think this is very important, particularly for the ground floor flats. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Councillor Roger Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, some of my questions have been answered, but following up from your request, Chair, about the track ownership and whether or not the organic farm has total control over that track. I'd like that to be confirmed one way or another. Regarding the entrance onto this particular track off the existing road, Highways have said that it's adequate for the job, and to a certain extent, locals knowing if this goes ahead that the development is there will, we hope, be more careful. They should always be careful, but be more careful in the vicinity. Anyone not knowing the area would, of course, be careful, we hope, in any case. What I'd like to know also is the Troy House has been there well over 300 years and is in a floodplain. How many times has it been flooded, and how many times has it been dangerously flooded? I can't see any mention of that anywhere. As far as I'm aware from reading the report, the new builds will be safe from flooding, and it's only the existing Grade 2 listed building that will be susceptible. So maybe I'd like some answers on that, if I may, please.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any comment at all from officers on the queries there? Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, I'll just go through, there's quite a few questions here, so I'll try and address them all. In terms of the viability of the scheme, obviously, as you can imagine, the viability of it is a material planning consideration when looking at restoring Troy House, and the margins of which are difficult in terms of the change in building costs, etc. There was an updated viability study conducted, which was a revision of the previous one, which did look at a few different bits of figures in terms of how things have changed and a few different options for the site. But any new enabling development of the site needs to be the minimum to restore the building. So this amount is the minimum amount that officers feel is acceptable in order to do the work that is needed to preserve and restore that building. So there were other options looked at. But this is the option which is considered to be acceptable to officers, and what we are recommending that it is approved. In terms of Section 106 money, I know that was mentioned, but we can ask for any of that in terms of this scheme, in terms of enabling development, or for any affordable housing or any sort of contributions like that, because the viability of this scheme is difficult. It's difficult to bring this type of development forward. And as I said, the enabling development is the minimum required to restore that building. In terms of the queries related to parking, there are 63 parking spaces. That is, some of the apartments would be 2 bedrooms, so it is slightly lower than what we normally require. However, there is at least 1 parking space per dwelling, and any additional parking on that site, again, would have an impact on the setting and the character of that listed building. So there is a mitigation element there as well in terms of the amount of parking. That site would also be managed by a private management company, so they would be looking after the landscaped areas, looking after the parking area, making sure that as you mentioned, Councillor Brown, that the parking, no one was parking directly next to the apartments, so that there would be a maintained site. So the parking is considered to be adequate, and Highways have had a look at that. Councillor Howard, you did mention about the Highways concerns and validity of the report. That was in reference to some of the conclusions that the transport statement made. They weren't, Highways officers weren't convinced overwhelming by them. However, they agreed with the conclusions that were made and outlined the previous use was material planning considerations. So on balance, they felt that it was acceptable, and that's why they haven't advised that they have no adverse comments overall. So they had a disagreement with some of the conclusions that were made within that report, but overall, they feel it is acceptable. In relation to the flooding and the ground floor element, the new build development would be above the flood level, so those bits, those ground floor flats, would actually, in the 1 in 100 plus climate change, they wouldn't flood, they would be flood free. The only building which would be affected would be Troy House itself, and given, I understand the suggestions in terms of the swimming pool, gym, etc. However, all of those things would have an impact again on the inherent character of the building, and some of those rooms would need to be retained as they are and preserved as they are. So those elements, I mean, yes, that could be looked at. Again, that would affect the viability of the scheme. However, we feel that altering the floor levels in that Troy House could potentially have an impact on its character, and Natural Resources Wales have alluded to that in their comments as well, and they accept this conclusion. The land ownership. Sorry, yes, thank you very much, Councillor. The land ownership and the access track, I mean, that would be a private matter and a civil matter for the applicant and the neighbouring landowners to come to an agreement on that in terms of the way the track is managed and maintained, if the development was to proceed, and it'd be a civil matter for them to sort out. In planning terms, the principle of that access is deemed to be acceptable, and that's why we are suggesting that the application should be approved in its current form. The long-term maintenance of that track and how it serves that development would be a civil matter for the landowner and for the applicant.
Sorry, Craig, the historic flooding?
Apologies, Councillor. We don't have that data to you today. I could get it from Natural Resources Wales. However, I mean, the report clearly outlines that in the flood events and what would happen in the event of a 1 in 100 flood event, and in the extreme events, there would be a safe refuge and also an evacuation plan. So they're the facts in terms of what would happen in the event of a flood. Unfortunately, I haven't got the exact data when it last flooded and what the predictions would be, but in the event of a 1 in 100 flood event, the buildings, the new builds would be flood-free. The Troy House would flood on the ground floor, but there would be safe refuge to the upper floors, and there would be an escape plan which would be conditioned with an evacuation plan as well.
Thank you, Amy.
There's also another question about enforcement action and what action have we taken since we last brought the application to committee. At that point, you did recommend or grant us authority to serve an urgent works notice as we were concerned about the condition of the building. We still are, and we have been discussing this with the agent and the owner. However, we were very keen to try and move this application forward as well and try and maintain and build a relationship with the owner, because obviously the best result is that he carries out the work rather than us having to take formal enforcement action that is costly and difficult and not a very good working relationship between the two of us. So we were hoping that we will get a favourable recommendation on the application and that will maintain the relationship. If not, obviously, we do still have the option to serve an urgent works notice, and that will be our plan to serve the urgent works notice. And this will focus on repairing or propping the ceilings and patch repairing the roof. The urgent works notice only allows us to do the minimum necessary to make the building wind and watertight. So it's essentially a sticking plaster on it. It doesn't look at a long-term viable, sustainable solution to the building. So whilst it is action that we are prepared to take, and we can still think it's really important that we look at a long-term future for the building.
Thank you. Do you want to come? Oh, sorry, Councillor Brown. I'll take Councillor Higginson and then Councillor Brown. Quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I mean, whatever happens there, there's going to be a lot of traffic movement on that lane to that house. You know, if it's only to bring it back into a protected status, then, if I put it that way. But you know, it needs protecting. It urgently needs attention, and I think the action proposed. I'm talking about this plan is probably the best way to ensure that house is protected for many years to come. And the access track. I mean that's an aside. Appreciating it is there, but it's an aside because it'll be to the benefit of everyone using that lane to do something about it, and probably reinstatement by resurfacing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown and Councillor Howard.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I've been trying to make sensible suggestions for this site, basically to mitigate the fact that as you've already said, that Troy House at the bottom may well flood. I didn't actually suggest a swimming pool. I mean, there might be a pool there if it floods, but I actually did suggest things like a gym, a lounge, possibly a laundrette if the flats themselves, because of the architectural design of the building, have difficulty in drying things out of the window and so forth. So they were actually sensible suggestions, and they were suggestions in line with the nature of the building, you know, because obviously gym equipment wouldn't need any alterations necessarily in the outside of the building. So they were all things that could be feasible. And I think, unfortunately, because this hasn't ever been considered, we don't know what the viability of such a way of mitigating it being in flood zone C2 would be. And I do think that this is something, I mean, I would like to have this application deferred just to consider whether or not that is feasible, because I don't think, from the information that I've got, that we do have enough certainty over the viability of the particular schemes. And I know it would be far less devastating if a gym got flooded than a residential property got flooded. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Then Councillor Jez Becker afterwards, please.
Thank you. I take Craig's point about the access lane, and that those issues will be a civil one, although condition 3 does require that details are supplied prior to development of improvements to it. And I just wanted to clarify that the plan that's supplied with our drawings does form part of the proposal for the passing bays and the improvement of the surface and then the widening of the lane. What I would also ask perhaps is consideration, if committee are minded to approve this, that either condition 3 or 4 is amended to ensure that any vehicles delivering to the site, okay, and I appreciate the construction management plan condition, but that there's some kind of provision there for delivery vehicles to be accommodated off the main highway. Because what you don't want is, if there are cows going to be blocking the lane for a while and there's some heavy vehicles waiting to deliver materials for the site, the worst thing that could happen is for them to be parked up on the main road in the vicinity of the bend. So could we amend one of those conditions to require the provision of some lay-by, albeit temporary one, maybe, during the construction period to keep those vehicles off the main road?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jez, and then Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to thank the officers for their hard work on this. It's been a very long slog, and I'd also like to thank my colleagues for giving it good scrutiny. My opinion has sort of wavered throughout this discussion, really. I feel like we're making an awful lot of compromises for this building, and I've got to say, at first, I felt like that was too many compromises, especially with the highways issues that people have become quite fixed on. But then I look at the well-being aspect and the future of this building, and I do think, well, what compromise could really be too little? We need this building to be renovated. This is our last real shot at doing that in partnership with the people who own it. Yes, there is another level beyond that where we may have enforcement, but I'd like to see a more collegiate and constructive way of solving the problem. And this may not be the end of its journey. It will probably be called in because of its flood risk nature, and we haven't had much success with that in recent planning applications. So given that, I've actually swung all the way around, and I think actually for the future of this building, that is the primary concern of what we're considering here today. Highways are satisfied with the egress and ingress to the site. I would be recommending that we approve this with that in mind. So.
Thank you very much. Councillor Alan Davis. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I seem to recall when I visited this site, which wasn't yesterday, but the time before that our officers had spent an inordinate amount of time talking to the person that owns this building, and it had taken a very long time to get to this situation where we are now. And therefore, I'm very pleased to see that there are, if my counting is correct, 32 conditions attached to this application, because I think that's essential. And I think those 32 conditions deal with a lot of the issues that have been raised here today. As far as the access is concerned, our highways have said that there's no objection to it. I'm not an expert on highways, they are the experts, so we've got to take cognizance of what they say. And it's essential, I think, that this building is retained for future generations, and therefore, personally, I would recommend that we pass this application. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. There are a couple of comments that I'll pick up on. Oh, sorry, Councillor Higginson.
I prefer to hear the comments first of all, but I'm going to make a proposal, Madam Chairman, if I may.
Councillor Dovey, you haven't spoken yet, please.
No, Madam Chairman, I'm reluctant to speak anyway. I think there is some merit in what Councillor Brown has said. I think the fact that we are talking about the ground floor of this property and how that if we changed the proportions of it in some way slightly, I guess the room height you're talking about, to make the changes in the basement, to make the basement a utility service, if you like. We're concerned about the changes that would make to the room, and yet we are rather more sanguine about the fact that the room could get flooded and all the damage that would go along with that. I think this is, the wisdom of Job is required over this one. So I do think Councillor Brown's proposal should be looked into further. I think there's room for discussion there, and I have reservations as well about the track, especially how it's going to be managed next to where it goes to the farm and where it goes into the building. We were there yesterday and saw what the track was like. I'm sure it's going to be much better than that, but it really does have to be much better than that. I think that's all I have to say, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor
And I'll make my decision on the moment.
I believe Craig wishes to comment again. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Councillor Chair. I just wanted to mention that with regards to the Troy House flooding, we're talking about 210 millimetres. So it will flood, but it's 210 millimetres, just for clarification in terms of the amount of flooding that will take place. And alterations to the building itself wouldn't be to the roof, they'd be to the ground floor levels, and that would affect the proportions. And I mean, Amy's the expert in this matter, but it would actually affect the inherent character of the building. So there would be concerns that we would need to review in regards to that. But the amount of flooding, the amount of flood water we're talking about is 210 millimetres, which is considered to be acceptable on balance.
Right, thank you. It was highlighted about Monmouth Town Council being very concerned, but nobody has wished to speak on behalf of the Town Council today. But maybe there's an awful lot of people in Monmouth Town itself. They're not aware of that wonderful big building. Unless you came down from Lydart and viewed it in the bottom, you would not know it was there. I've always known it was there, and actually I played netball there when it was a school. I wasn't a resident, but we were visiting teams, so I've known it for a very long time. So, and then it was a boarding school. Also, as for the issue with the cows in the lane, I expect most of you know that I'm a dairy farmer, and yes, through the summer when the cows are out, you move them up and down lanes depending where they are grazing. And we do have a slight rat run in our lane because we've got the Montessori school at the other end. But they do know, the parents, whoever going back and forth to school, they can do an alternative way around. But there is no alternative, and I think as it was a school and the farm has always been there, you drive accordingly to what's in front of you. And as for the resurfacing of that lane, if it does belong to the farmer, that is going to be considerable. When it was a school, they were aware of it. The farm was there then. It always has been there. And if anybody wishes to live there, whether there is muck in the lane or not, that is up to them. They will be aware of it. And as for turning in off the main road, yes, you halt if you're going to turn right, if you're coming from the Raglan, and you drive accordingly. So it's the same wherever you drive today, on whether you're familiar with the roads or not, you drive accordingly. So, and if highways are happy with it, well, I am also. But as I said, I am aware of it all there, and I think I've come at this with an open mind anyway to this, which has been a very long application. The officers have been working at it so hard for so long that it would be nice to see us now move on with some sort of decision today, if you're minded to follow what is recommended. So I believe Councillor Higgins, that you wish to approve.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move we accept this this application.
And Jez, and you will second. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please?
10 for approval, Chairman.
Those against? 2 abstentions? 2 abstentions. Right, thank you very much indeed.
Therefore, Chairman, the application is approved.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you for your all very hard work on this application.
Chair, just to clarify the procedure now, we'll amend that condition as per Giles's request for the deliveries during construction. Would notify the Welsh Government now of our intention, and they have a period within which to consider whether or not to call the application in, but we'll tell you in due course what their decision is.
As for the comment of Councillor Brown and the facility in the ground floor, that's been addressed.
Do you mean in relation to the use of the ground
Yes,
floor?
yes.
No, it's not changed.
It's not changed. It stays as it is, yeah, as the
Yes.
proposals are.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much for that clarity, Amy. We now go on to the next application of the afternoon on pages 29 to 34. Oh, sorry. Sorry, we've got speakers on an application on 01336, and this is on pages 47 to 52. We also let people know that if there are people to speak, we do alter the agenda so that they can speak first and then leave if they so wish, rather than leave them waiting to go further down the agenda. Thank you. Thanks, Amy. Okay, Phil.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, application DC 2017-01336. This is a reserved matters planning application for 2 4-bedroom detached houses with a garden studio in the residential curtilage of Pennebryn on Oakfield Road in Monmouth. This is the existing dwelling at the site, Pennebryn. It's a large detached property on a large curtilage. You can the members noticed yesterday it's a very, very large site. Got a mixture of trees and landscaping on the site, surrounded by a mix of different properties, different residential properties, which vary in scale and design and materials that's used as well. So this application, this site, has actually been the subject of a outline planning application where the principle of 2 dwellings being developed on the site was established. So the previous application considered the principle and also the access as well. Phil, if you just want to go to the next. So there on the left-hand side of the site, there was an existing access within the red line boundary. That was approved previously as part of the outline planning application. So this reserved matters application is purely dealing with the appearance and scale of the dwellings, as well as the layout and the landscaping of the site. So this application, the site layout actually outlines where the dwellings are going to go. So there's 2 dwellings located to the south of the site, labelled House 1 and House 2, and there's also a garden studio on the property to the west, which is located there. So let's go to the next. That's just, if you go to the elevations, Phil, please. These are the floor plans. So these are the elevations of the dwellings. They're very contemporary design dwellings with a unique design to them. They've picked up on some of the elements in the area. So the pitch roof, they got a two-storey pitch gable roof, and it's a central core to the building. And then it's a modular development with a mix of a high palette of materials, actually. So there's stone in there, there's timber cladding, and there's external render as well. And so picking up on the materials in the area, albeit giving it a new modern contemporary design to the area as well. On the back there, it's also two balconies on the rear elevations, and if you look on that left picture, you can see that that's the drawing for the studio as well. Yeah, so that's the studio there. So the proposed site, I said, is for two contemporary dwellings, and this is a reserve matters planning application, so we're purely looking at the design and scale of the dwelling, so the principle has already been established. In terms of consultation during the application process, Monmouth Town Council did recommend refusal of the application. They did raise concerns with regards to the privacy implications onto neighbouring properties. They also felt that this application contravened the previous consent in relation to landscaping at the site. There's also concerns raised with regards to the outline permission did not give any indication of windows, and also that there was no sign of a summer house / studio on the previous application. In terms of some of those points that has been raised, I mean, the reserve matters planning application is dealing with all those matters in terms of the windows and the landscaping and the studio as well. I mean, there was an indication of garages on the previous outline consent, so this is similar to that. The tree officer also has been heavily involved with this application, and they've been liaising with the applicant to ensure that the scheme and the trees that have been felled and lopped at the site have got their approval, and all the trees worthy of retention are being retained within the final scheme. The neighbouring, I said, the site is surrounded by neighbouring properties, but if you want to go to that location plan again, that one, yeah, you can see there's a number of properties around the site. So there have been a number of objections from neighbouring properties which have outlined that the development would have an impact on privacy with overlooking windows, and the balconies would have an impact on privacy issues, and that the car movements would also have an impact on amenity and potential issues with drainage. So they're the concerns that have been outlined within your report. In terms of officers' recommendation, we do feel the scale and the design of these dwellings is acceptable. It is a contemporary design, it is unique, but as you've seen yesterday, it is a very secluded site. The development would have a minimal visual impact on the wider area, and this type of development is of high standards, and it's considered that its impact on the wider area would be very limited. It would only be noticeable when you actually enter the site. So if we are going to have this sort of modern design within Monmouthshire, this is an ideal location for something like that to occur. As I said, there's a high palette of materials, which we do feel would harmonise with the area, and is appropriate for this site. So on balance, we do feel that, not on balance, the development is in accordance with our local development policies in relation to design and the amenity of the area. In terms of intervening distances with windows, if we have a look at the concerns on the side elevation, on the west side, there are concerns with overlooking windows from this elevation. These windows would be on the ground floor, and the applicants have erected on site, if you noticed yesterday, a fence to help with privacy issues. There are also a couple of windows on the first floor elevation of this property, but the intervening distance for them is about 11 metres, which is in accordance with planning practice and guidance. So all of the intervening distances with the properties has been checked and is in accordance with standardised practices in terms of planning, which allow for about a 10 metre gap between first floor windows to boundaries. All of these are over that, and that's also in relation to the balconies at the rear as well. They're over 12 metres away from the boundary, so again they would be in accordance with that guidance. There are a couple of windows on, if you look at house number on the east there. There's a couple of windows there on the first floor to the bathrooms. There's a condition outlined within the report on these would be obscure glazed. So again, this would aim to protect the privacy of the neighbouring properties, and fixed panes so they wouldn't be able to open the windows and look out. So having reviewed all of the intervening distances with the properties, in terms of privacy, it's considered to be acceptable in planning terms, and again would be in accordance with policy EP1 of the local development plan. There was also some concerns raised in relation to the landscaping of the site and the loss of some trees. However, as I said, our tree officer has been working with the applicant to ensure that the trees worthy of retention are retained. And unfortunately, a condition has been missed off your report, but I do propose to put it in relation to a condition that the council's tree officer Jim Keach has proposed to ensure that a tree surveyor is on site to ensure that the protection of those trees is maintained during the development. So that would be a condition I propose to add. So apologies for not adding that sooner. There was also concerns raised in relation to drainage, and the applicant has outlined where the soakways would go. This would be a more detailed matter then for building control to review. So in planning terms, this is considered to be acceptable in principle. It would be down for building control to ensure that the technical specifications of that soakway system is acceptable, and they'd have to get the building regulation certificate to approve that. But in planning terms, we feel that this is acceptable as it is. So officers are recommended that the application is approved subject to the conditions outlined in the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. Well, most members have been there, if not once, maybe twice, when we went to outline. And now we have this, somebody who wishes to speak on this application. Could you please give your name, and you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Nick Tate. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the committee members for the opportunity to talk. I'm here to represent my own views and also that of other affected residents, in particular Mr. and Mrs. Evans of White Gables and Mr. and Mrs. Derricott of Falstaff. Firstly, I believe it's clear from the objections that all the surrounding properties and the Town Council object to the development on the grounds of loss of privacy and development being overbearing. And I'd like to note that the local residents feel extremely frustrated by how the process has been undertaken without any consideration, in particular the existing substantial screening in the form of hedges and trees being cut down without consultation, or any time being allowed to consult or review the plans before submission. But I've got three key requests for the committee to add conditions for approval today. Firstly, around privacy and amenity. As noted by the Town Council, the outline planning permission did not have windows facing existing properties. And whilst the planning officer has conditioned frosting of the eastern side bathroom windows on the first floor, the bathroom windows on the west elevation overlooking my property, which look directly into children's bedrooms, have not been recommended for frosting, which would affect not only our privacy but also those of future residents. The hedgerow on the western boundary with Falstaff is very sparse, which will affect privacy issues. And as mentioned, there's a well-established hedge on the eastern boundary with White Gables that was removed. We therefore ask that fencing should be erected or extended to give White Gables and Falstaff reasonable privacy as well. On the flood risk, number 2, the area is prone to flash flooding, with my property being threatened in the recent past. It's because the underlying geology is considered unsuitable for soakaways, which I note a number of independent tests on the planning portal confirm. And I therefore ask the committee that soakaways must be subject to independent testing to BRE 365, or the surface water be connected to mains drains. With regard to the summer house, point 3, at 3.3 metres high, it'll be 1.5 metres above the recently installed fence line. And given the fall of the land, will be quite overbearing on our property. Now, the Welsh Government own planning guidelines for homeowners indicate that any flat roof building on land around a main house must be a maximum of 2.5 metres high. I therefore ask that a condition made in the approval that the summer house is 2 metres from the boundary and no more than 2.5 metres high. I believe that these 3 requests are reasonable to protect privacy and amenity, are in accordance with planning policy and standards. Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, I urge you to accept these objections and enforce conditions as requested. To summarise, frosting of the west side bathroom windows of House 2
erecting fencing around Falstaff and White Gables, soakaways tested to BRE 365, and the summer house to be 2 metres from the border and a maximum of 2.5 metres in height. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I believe we do have another speaker. Could you please state your name, and you have also 4 minutes.
My name is Rachel Sully. I'm the applicant with my husband and also the architect for the scheme. Having bought Pennybryn with the outline approval for 2 houses already granted, I obviously had to work within the constraints of that approval. I initially consulted at length with Jim Keach, the Monmouth's tree officer, and we've only carried out work to vegetation as it was overgrown with his knowledge and approval. I've worked to retain the trees he valued and have included to supplement these with more trees. I've tried to take on board all the objections that were raised at outline stage in my detailed design, positioning the houses as far away from the south and west boundaries as possible, lining them up with blank elevations of neighbouring properties and garages where possible. They are significantly further away than the houses are shown on the approved site plan, approved under the outline planning application. We did also consult with our neighbours and invited them round to look at the drawings. We've then erected fences at their request to hopefully allay some of the concerns. The houses have been broken down into smaller elements, the design that you've looked at, in order to keep the impact of them to a minimum, the overall height obviously being lower if they've got smaller spans. I've avoided putting first floor windows on the west elevations of house number 2, with the exception of one which simply looks over a garage blank roof. On all the others, all those walls are much more than the 10.5 metre limit allowable under permitted development rights. Drainage has been raised. It is actually a very large site, and obviously detailed design of drainage would always be carried out with accordance with the building regulations, the BRE digest being a standard. And equally, the summer house I actually included in also to help with privacy screening. It's very low. It's about, I can't remember, it's about 1.5 or 2 metres from the boundary, and I believe from Mr. Tate's property, the angle means he probably won't even be able to see it from behind the fence. As I say, within the constraints of the approval already given, I have done everything I possibly can to reduce any impact on my neighbours, conscious that I will be living in the property and I have a lot of neighbours bordering the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. The local member isn't here, and I don't believe he's raised concerns, so the committee were there yesterday, although we had been there previously to the outline some time ago. So I'll welcome comments now. Councillor Murphy, you usually kick off with the comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could we just hear from the officers on those couple of points that the neighbour raised, and then I'll be happy to come in.
Right. Phil or Craig, would wish to comment on the question of that?
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. The first floor windows on house number 2, this is the west elevation, the bathroom ones, that was the window I was mentioning about in terms of the intervening distance of 11 metres. That was within the guidance in terms of planning practice. So in terms of making it a condition to be obscure glazed, we don't think that's essential on that particular site for that particular window. That's why it hasn't been conditioned. In terms of the flash flooding. Obviously, this site is in a flood zone, and as I mentioned in my presentation, the drainage would be a consideration for building control to look at to the technical specifications. It is a very large site, and I have shown this very quickly to the building control officer, who feels that something can be established at the site. So it's just about in terms of the specification of that soakaway. In terms of the height of the summer house and the close proximity to the boundary, what the neighbouring party have outlined relates to the permitted development rights of what you can do without planning consent. Obviously, this summer house is part of the planning application. We feel the height is acceptable and wouldn't be significantly overbearing, given the intervening distance with the rear of the property as well. So all of these matters have been considered and have been reviewed. However, the impact on there is going to be an impact on the neighbouring properties. However, it's not considered to be unacceptable.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And having heard that, I mean, I'll be absolutely honest, they wouldn't be the design that I would have gone for. But in pure planning terms, this is what we're looking at. I think all of the questions I had have been answered, so I'd be happy to vote for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Right, thank you. Councillor Giles Howard. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. The privacy issues have been touched upon. As it says in the report, and Craig's explained, there is sufficient distance between the opposing elevations at the rear. I think there's about 11 metres to the boundary, and about the same again to the, I can't remember the name of the property, to the southeast, but it's sufficient anyway. I would be surprised if the bathrooms in the first floor, the side elevation, weren't obscure glaze, but I have come across in the past where such windows have been fitted with clear glazing and caused a privacy issue. So I'd like to recommend that the condition is amended to include all first floor windows, just to be on the safe side. And again, with the mention was made of the balconies, they're recessed, so there aren't going to be any views to the side, no more than you get from a standard window anyway. And I think if there is any detriment, the greatest detriment is going to be to the applicant's own property. As far as the design's concerned, and apologies to the applicant and architect, I'm not keen. I think it's the use of the timber that I dislike, and no doubt that the material qualities will be superb, but I don't like the use of the timber because I don't think it relates to the surrounding context, and I don't like the flat roofs, although I see that they're supposed to be green roofs, and the benefit of the flat roof is it'll help reduce the mass, so there's pros and cons to that. Lastly, the drainage was mentioned by the neighbour, and I note there is no drainage condition recommended, so in line with the Circular 16/2014, I'd recommend that a condition is added to for the submission of foul and surface water drainage details before development.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Roger Harris, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we have a look at the? I can't see the dimensions of the summer house. Could we have them again, particularly the height? And is it a single?
That's 6.4 by 4.8. I'll get the height for you.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's 3.5 metres high, isn't it?
3.5. Right. Okay. Okay. Is it? And I can't see. Is it conditioned that it's?
Oh, okay, yeah. 3.28, so 3.3.
Right. Okay.
That line there is the fencing as well. See the line next to it?
Yeah.
There, is it?
Yeah.
That's the height of the fence. Yeah. Okay. And it's conditioned that it's ancillary to the dwelling that is going to be. So it is quite large. So you can see that maybe people will be concerned about what potentially could happen. The other thing I'd like to know is the flat roof element. Is there a parapet, i.e., is it like a the flat roof like a castle, if you know what I mean. You can stand on it and look over the parapet. How deep is the parapet there?
There isn't a parapet. It's a flat roof. It's a membrane.
Parapet.
No.
No, that's all I needed to know. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have the discretion, and Mr. Tate has his hand up, so I wish he would. He obviously is concerned about something he makes to want to clarify. I'll also take the answer now from the applicant, as I've given you leave to speak.
I think the important thing, Madam Chair, is that obviously anyone in the summer house will not be able to look into adjoining properties.
Is that correct?
There are no windows on that side of the summer house. In fact, the ground
Councillor Murphy?
Just on the fence, Chair, is there any problem if the fence was 2.4 instead of 1.78? Or would that be too much mass altogether?
I'm not sure why we'd be requesting that, Councillor. Because there isn't a privacy issue in that sense with the fence. As the applicants explained, there is no windows. If the objective is to hide a building because you're worried about the overbearing impact of it, then having a taller fence closer to the boundary would probably make it worse, I'd have thought. I would just clarify briefly, the gentleman objecting mentioned a height of 2.5 metres in guidance for outbuildings. That's what you can do as permitted development. So it's not saying that's how tall outbuildings should be. If it's less than 2.5 metres in height, within 2 metres of the boundary, more than 2 metres from the boundary, you can do it without permission. If it's more, it needs permission. Just to give that bit of context.
Right, Councillor Brown, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'd certainly, looking at some of the neighbourhood comments that we've got and the later comments that they've got, there does seem to be a concern about privacy. I mean, one of the conditions talks about all screen walls and fences erected before dwellings are occupied. And I just wondered, when we actually went on the site, there didn't seem to be that much natural screening in terms of hedges and trees. I mean, are these fences going to be sufficient to provide the required level of privacy? And I certainly agree with Councillor Howard's comments about the need to frost these windows, because I think that's a very minor thing to actually put on a development, and nothing major, but may assist with privacy. And drainage is another issue. I don't know, the comment that doesn't seem to have been covered by your comments. I don't know whether or not, I was told that in the applicant said that the soakways will be looked at through building regs, but again, I think the drainage aspect does need to be conditioned, because you did mention something about a flood zone, but there's nothing in the report about that, and flash flooding has been mentioned. It's not in a flood zone, no, but flash flooding has been also mentioned by one of the people speaking. Thank you.
Chair, just to clarify a situation with the surface water drainage, it's not in a flood zone, in a recognised way, as we just talked about at length on the previous application. I think what the residents are saying is there can be a high volume of surface water runoff, and the query seems to be about whether or not the strata in the area and the rock ground conditions would allow for a surface water normal soakway to work. That's something that building regs looks at, all of that detail, and the British standards that the gentleman referred to. That's the spec that they'd look into. So I'm comfortable building regs would pick that detail up. In terms of the condition on the windows, we can add that if members so wish. I just wanted to clarify, I think Councillor Howard mentioned all of the first floor windows, but I'm assuming you just mean the sides. Yeah, I did assume that's what you meant, but just for clarity.
Right, thank you, Mark. Anybody else? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't think the question about why the neighbours are raising all these issues about the, hedges and so forth. I'd asked the question about whether the screen walls and fences were sufficient, because when we were on site, there didn't seem to be a lot of natural hedges or trees around at all.
I believe it's the distance as well that's involved with that, though, isn't it?
Yeah, for the ground floor windows, the outbuilding and garden spaces, the fences that are there are normal garden fences. They're adequate for privacy means. First floor windows, the relationship's fine. The side windows we talked about with obscure glazing, but the distances and the angles from the first floor front and rear windows, again, that's fine. There are comments in late correspondence about hedges removed, fences put up, who did what when. They're about the applicant's alleged actions or inactions. They're not material planning considerations for us. I was certainly satisfied when I saw on site that those fences are sufficient for privacy from the ground floor and from the garden areas. And you've talked about the first floor.
Thank you for that, Mark. I think Councillor Brown, your microphone is still on. Right, I think we've discussed this long enough. I believe, Councillor Murphy, you moved for approval and you wish to second it. Sorry? Quickly, please. They want.
My vice chair, it's covered by building regs, but if committee insists there's an extra condition, it can be done. But I'd say it's not necessary. We'd liaise with building regs, and they would cover that off.
The thing I'd say to that, Councillor Howard, is advice we're getting from the Planning Inspectorate is that you don't overlap with other means of regulation, and certainly on smaller developments, single plots, and even plots, even developments that are larger than that, they would not normally condition that. They'd expect the building regs to pick up surface water drains, and that's come from the head of the Planning Inspectorate as well. So they tend to strike out those sort of conditions when we discuss them at appeals. But
okay.
Again, it's ultimately up to members what.
Okay. Right. Councillor Webb.
That proposal then.
Thank you. Like Councillor Murphy has now moved for approval. Councillor Powell has seconded. Could I have a show of hands for approval?
Sorry, could I second the drainage condition?
Oh.
Yeah, you were seconding it as well, so wanting the drainage condition.
Yeah. Okay.
Are they going to vote on that? Or?
Yeah, you better vote on that then. The seconded of the drainage.
Just a suggestion, Chairman, to help. Do you want to take the application to approve first and then decide on whether or not the condition is attached to that approval? Mm-hmm. Do that secondly.
Yeah. Okay. Hands for approval, then.
So that's unanimous. Sorry, Chairman, that's 11 votes. Yeah, the approval.
Councillor Howard proposes, Councillor Webb seconded. So could I have a show of hands, and that is just for the drainage condition?
Right, that's 3-4.
Those against?
And that's 6 against. So there's no drainage condition to be attached to the Commission, Chairman.
And hopefully the building regs will look into all
Yeah, they
of
will.
that.
Chair,
We're quite happy with that, are
obscure
we not?
glazing to the first floor side windows, just to be
Yes.
clear on that.
Yes. Yeah.
No, not clear, sorry.
Not clear.
No pun intended.
It is not clear.
So members want obscure glazed in all of the first floor side elevation windows, yeah?
Yeah. We tend to do that even in the countryside, so I'm sure they will be quite happy with that in a more densely populated area. Right, thank you very much. We now go on to the third application of the afternoon. On page 29 to 34, 00936, and this is Carrow Hill.
Not sure, wait. Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is a site we looked at yesterday, those who were at the site visits. It's to retain the track, the continuation of that track, which you see in the picture, through part of the woodland that's owned by Carrow Hill Farm, to service fields at the southern end of the farm, which you can't see beyond the woodland. So let's just go through the pictures. Yeah, so the track was actually undertaken. It could have actually been done under what we call an agricultural notification for engineering works if they'd actually put the agricultural notification in as permitted development before they'd done the work. But unfortunately they didn't do that. They'd actually carried out the work before they'd done that. So it couldn't be done under a prior approval, if you like, under the agricultural notification process. So the work could have been permitted development if they'd followed the actual course in logical order, but the works were carried out without that process being followed, so needed full planning permission to retain what was done. So that's the track up on the right-hand side, leading from the existing track, which is below it, and it runs through the woodland, as I say, to fields to the south. That's where it's been done. That's not, we were advised yesterday by the applicant, any material from the wood that's been taken down from the trees to create the path. That was actually from the large part of the woodland and is stored on a part of the track that already existed and isn't part of this application. And then that's the actual track here. There, so it runs from the track you could see in the photo that we saw when we stood in the farmyard looking down. It runs through the farm, through the woodland, and then this is the actual part that's been created to service the fields here and here. And there are other tracks existing in the woodland as well. Sorry, let's go back. So I'll leave it on that, really. There were concerns from our countryside section that some valuable flora, ground flora, were taken out as a result of this. And there's been quite a bit of discussion as to how this could be mitigated. We do suggest a condition that there's a replanting condition specified to ensure native species trees are put in. There seems to have also been a misunderstanding as to how many trees have been taken out as a result of the proposal, with the farmer reflecting that there's possibly around 40 that were actually removed, and some of those were saplings, small, well, most of them were saplings, because they were on a steepish bit of slope, which they've actually managed to engineer through to get to the fields, and therefore there were very few of any tangible value, and they've already planted, I think, in the region of 80 to actually gain access, which is actually twice the number removed. So there is a replanting condition suggested by Countryside, but members may wish to debate the need for that, given how many have been planted already, or perhaps what's been planted already could be put into that replanting condition or to meet the terms of that replanting condition that's been set out by countries or requested by Countryside. The need for the actual track is to service the fields at the back of the farm without resorting to taking the big wide machinery like a combine harvester or other planter machinery through a narrow stretch of public highway, which has created damage to that actual highway and has led to local complaints. So it's for practical purposes it's been put forward. So we're willing to recommend approval subject to this replanting and mitigation exercise, but it sounds as if the farmer's already carried out significant amount of that already within this semi-natural landscape. So we would recommend approval subject to those conditions in the report.
Thank you, Phil. Local member, are you, Councillor Murphy, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And this application, well, was as a result of doing precisely what Phil just said. The agricultural machinery was going down Storefields Lane, was wrecking it, not just the lane, but the machinery as well. And it was necessary to create this internal access. Regrettably, some trees were felled, and there was also a lot of bluebell and wild garlic that was displaced. But we are where we are. It's done. I'm sorry that it was done in the way that it was done, but there has been some mitigation. I think it's important that as much restoration is done as possible. But that access was necessary for all sorts of reasons. It's just a pity that it was done in the way that it was done.
Thank you, Councillor. Being a farmer myself, I'm well aware of the size of machinery these days, and the lanes and the surface of the lanes and the banks get eroded. But I think most probably with hindsight, he wished he would have gone down the right road, and it would have been a lot easier, all of it, really. Councillor Jim Higginson first, please.
Yeah, I move we accept the application, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Webb, then Councillor Giles.
I second that, please.
Right, Councillor Giles Howard, wish to comment?
Yeah, I agree with the recommendation, Chair. I also feel that the condition is necessary, and if the existing planting can be taken into account as part of the discharge of that condition, that's fair enough. But I think it's important. It's been identified as ancient woodland and as sink, and we need to be sure that the replanted trees are of the mix that the tree officer would want to see. So I'm happy with it, subject to the conditions.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Dovey?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I accept all that has been said. I think it's a great shame that this was carried out in the way that it was, and I think farmers, while doing a good job, they must be mindful of the rules and regulations, and they must abide by them, because it brings their own reputation into disrepute if they've been seen to be acting as if the law doesn't apply to them. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Most probably it's the job that needed doing, and at the time when conditions were right. That's where usually a farmer takes his decisions.
Well, that is it. But the rules and regulations.
Oh yes, definitely.
Are the
I wouldn't
rules
agree
and
more.
regulations.
Yeah, Councillor Jim Higginson, you propose for approval. I had a seconder, Councillor Powell. So could I have a show of hands for approval, please?
That's unanimously approved, Chairman.
Page 35 to 46, 01116, and that is the drill hall in Chepstow.
Thank you. Another one we visited yesterday, that's the existing building. It's a... all right, Craig? Some crazy 10 seconds, is it? Yeah, it's a drill hall. It's a much used community hall, used for theatre, shows, films, drama groups, etc. In the middle of Chepstow, next to the public car park there. Just have a quick look at the pictures. That's the corner of it. It's a large stone wall that runs down the side by the car park. That storage container will be removed as a result of these current proposals. That's looking back the other side of the building. That's looking back. The camera was taken by that White House, just the previous shot. That's again another one of the container. Looking back behind the building, down the side towards the public car park. That gap through there is actually one of the public access points that takes you through back towards the castle. So that's showing it in context. You've got the car park, There's a few access points which can take you out of the car park, up through that cul-de-sac, back towards the Castle car park, so you've got easy access to the other another large car park there, so it's not reliant on this parking area here, which is also used by residents who've got several, well, there's quite a high degree of parking permits there for residents there. I mean, it's one of the issues that's created tension with this particular planning application. So proposal is to extend the drill hall and to rejig it internally to make it more usable, to make it multifunctional sort of space. The projections on the front elevation here and here will be demolished, and then the building would be built out the sides and on the front, and an insert put in here to rejig the spaces. If we have a look at the that's the current building, that's the current floor plan. So you can see it's one large hall with raised stage, but to get to the various uses you have to walk through the main hall to get to the various other spaces, including loos and other ancillary spaces. There's no alternative way, really obvious internal. The internal space doesn't work very well, put it that way. The current proposal seeks to improve upon that. So the proposal would extend along the front there to create this glazed corridor, so you can see into the building. It creates that entrance way to give the building more identity. That'll be made out of some stone if it can be resalvaged from the projecting elements at the moment, and it'll have a more modern feel to it as well, with aluminium glazing. It'll obviously have a sign on it to again announce the identity of the entrance, and on the back there'll be an insert into between those two projecting elements there, with a bin store as well on that side. So if you look at the floor area, you can see that the building then is more usable. There's a corridor along here to get you to this other studio room here with loos and changing facilities and more loos at the top there. And there's a boxing club over on the other side to remain there as well. So it's just a more usable space. You can actually have different uses going on at the same time, possibly something there as well as going on in the main hall, without them impinging upon one another and people crossing the main route. There have been quite a lot of objections to it. The key objections have related to things like loss of parking in the area. As a result, there's a worry that this will lead to even more traffic in the area. I mean, the simple answer to that is it's in probably a sustainable location as you can find. Where else are you going to provide these sort of facilities if you don't provide them here? There's hundreds and hundreds of parking spaces in the public car parks in the town that you could walk from to get to this facility. So the fact that we've got this facility and it's now proposed to be improved upon is I think something that is certainly supported in policy terms, and in practical terms it's a sustainable location. So in planning policy and practical terms, it ticks the boxes really to make it an appropriate location for this type of development. There was concern that the building out here was going to cut out the amount of traffic and manoeuvre around through the car park. It's only single access around here. It's not two-way traffic. You can still get round. There's plenty of room to in here and the parking bays. So it's perfectly acceptable in planning terms. You'll get rid of the old container. It'll actually create a more usable space, and it's attractive in its own right then, and an improved looking building. So we think, despite the concerns from local residents, which we sympathise with, that's really a matter for traffic management and enforcement in the area. Traffic wardens can ensure that parking permits are being, residents' parking spaces are being parked in properly and not being parked in by all and sundry. But that's something that could happen anyway, regardless of somebody visiting the hall. If somebody's visiting the town, they could park in those spaces. If they haven't got the right permit, that should be enforced. So this shouldn't really impinge upon that, and we'd recommend approval for this community facility enhancement.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil, for very detailed on what looks to be a very big improvement. Is it your ward, Jez? Right, you will take the comments first, please.
Could I just ask a question, Madam Chairman? As a town councillor, I am not, as my colleagues will, but as a town councillor, I'm not in breach of anything in talking to this issue.
Not unless you spoke at the town council.
Could you tell, perhaps Chairman, if I could assist Councillor Dovey. What is the what's the nature of your interest? You're a town councillor, Councillor Dovey. What's the interest of the town council in that building?
Well, the interest of the town council in that building is the fact that they're going to go for a bid from Crosby. Actually, yes, go on, you do.
Thanks, David. Essentially, you know, there's a colour that surrounds this planning application, and part of that is that there's a lottery bid in, and it's going through, the drill hall is going through a sort of rather difficult birthing procedure of a community asset transfer. As a town council, we currently hold the lease, and will probably continue to hold the lease, and we're involved in then being the lessors to the CIO that will take on the drill hall. So, as both town councillors, we've been in plenty of discussions in the town council over the business plan, the lottery bid, these kind of elements. I myself haven't been involved in any planning element with this.
That was my next question then. So you've not been involved in considering as a consultee any planning application regarding the drill hall? Both? Okay, that's fine. So can I suggest then that you both declare personal interests as members of the Chepstow Town Council, but I suggest, but it is a matter for you as always in these types of cases. I don't think it is a prejudicial interest, but that is a matter for you. So I think a personal interest would suffice. So if you could both of you declare that, members of Chepstow Town Council, please, to the meeting, and furthermore, if you could complete your pro forma, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
But they can still comment on it.
Absolutely, Chairman. Take a full part in the debate and vote. It's personal, non-prejudicial.
Thank you for that clarity there, Rob. Jez?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the drill hall, much used facility in Chepstow, as I've just said, I mean, it's colour to the application. It's not actually relevant, the fact that it's going through the lottery bid and the community asset transfer, because we're here to look at a planning issue. Within that planning issue, some of the elements that have been raised by local residents do include the parking, and also access down what would be the eastern edge of the plan there, the right-hand edge, between the back and to what you saw, the archway that leads over to the castle. That's another point of issue. The front of the drill hall is very inefficient. It does need to be redone. If we got the lottery money, this plan might go ahead. Does it change the car parking issue? Lower Chepstow has a lot of car parking issues. It's overstressed already in the capacity. We've got a lot of new homes going up there. There is already a very considerable residence permit scheme in that car park, which is not in place in the other 3 MCC car parks in my ward. So already we make quite a lot of headway in that area. And actually, I don't think, if we could just get clarification on whether we actually do lose spaces as a result of this plan, which I don't think we do. I think it just looks like a rejigging of the way around. Sure, and the right of access down that sort of right-hand side as well, so for public right-of-way sort of thing. Those are the two sort of planning issues that have been brought to my attention. Yeah.
Chair, my reading of the comments from the car parks officer was more a concern that by bringing the front of the building forward, it reduces the width of the roadway through the car park. And if that meant the car park layout had to be rejigged, then spaces would be lost. But I think as we saw yesterday, feels like ages ago. Yesterday, we managed to fill up a fair amount of that access road, and cars were still able to pass around us. So I don't think a new layout would be necessitated, and therefore parking spaces shouldn't be lost. But as Phil mentioned, we're incredibly lucky to have the facility with a car park right outside. Another couple in easy walking distance, a train station and a bus station in walking distance. It's not many areas can boast that, let alone in Monmouthshire. So, notwithstanding the comments, and we understand a lot of those spaces are residents parking in the evenings. We're happy on a highway parking context.
Thank you for that, Mark. Okay, Jen.
I'll just add another couple of points that have been raised by local residents. In terms of the parking, just to reiterate, that is actually going to get more stressed over time because we're also introducing a £1 parking fee for all day parking in that car park. However, it's colour. Again, it's not really relevant necessarily to this planning application as we're not losing spaces. There was concern about an amenity issue with the bin shed and its proximity to neighbouring residents. So, I mean, if we could just look into that slightly.
That we did refer that to environmental health. They didn't have any significant concerns about that. It's largely down to how it's managed. So let me get to the layout. So that's existing. Sorry. Yeah. So there'd be a bin store. Excuse me. There, and there's residents up here, isn't there? So it's how that's managed. I mean, and there'd be statutory nuisance legislation that would control that. But again, it's a sort of perceived fear about what might happen, what not will or is likely to happen. So as long as that's managed responsibly by the managers of the facility, then there's no reason why that should cause a problem in the future. Just as any shop may have a bin store near existing flats or dwellings in a town centre,
Thank you, Phil.
Just to say, with those concerns addressed, I would actually propose that we accept for approval.
Councillor Dovey, did you wish to comment at all now? Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark?
Yeah, just to say it was a pleasure to be in Chepstow yet again yesterday with Councillor Dovey looking at this treasured building, and it would give me great pleasure to second Jez's proposal for its approval.
Could I respond, Madam Chairman?
You may do.
It was a rare pleasure to have you get off the bus and be in Chepstow yesterday. Perhaps you might take the opportunity again sometime, and you'll be very welcome, I'm sure.
Thank you, and I'm sure those that are viewing us on live streaming will wonder what it was all about. Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very supportive of this application because although my ward isn't actually in Chepstow, I'm in a ward near Chepstow at Shire Newton Ward, and the Chepstow Drill Hall is a good community and arts venue, and improving this facility can only be good news for the town, really. So I'm very pleased to support it. I mean, Chepstow itself, they show films, they do various activities there, and Chepstow is an area which doesn't have its own cinema, for example. So, it does provide a community and arts entertainment facility for the local population. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Anybody else wish to comment? No. Right. So it was moved by Councillor Becker. You have a seconder in Councillor Dovey. Show of hands for approval, please.
That's unanimously approved, Chair.
Right, thank you very much indeed. And I just leave if you will hang on for a few minutes after we finish live streaming, because Mark wishes to address the committee. Thank you.
I was just going to give colleagues a rest and cover this one quickly, Chair, if you'd like. Up at Llanant, the application was for a fairly large domestic storage building in the rear garden of the house. Committee will probably remember we went out there for a site visit. This is the reduced version of the building. It was bigger, and we asked them to reduce it in size, I think twice, but committee was still of the view it was too big, and so refused the application. We were recommending approval for the revised version. But the The inspector had a look at it and has concluded it was okay. It's a short version, so the appeal's been allowed.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. And there's no list of new appeals. Is there any? Was there?
I haven't got it with me, sorry.
Yeah, Chair, there's one appeal for a property in Leechpool Holdings for use of a domestic garage for various purposes, and a second one for 1A Chapel Road, Abergavenny, change of use of a building from a dwelling house to 2 dwelling houses. So the first one's written reps appeal, and the second one's an informal hearing.
This hearing, if anybody wishes to sit in on Thursday here of Llanant Farm at Lanishan. I believe it's in, is it your ward, Councillor Webb, or Councillor Blakeburgh's ward?